almost fall day and doing your duty as a citizen and learning what's going to be before us on the November ballot. Welcome to the League of Women Voters Forum for the candidates for the Palo Alto City Council. My name is Bonnie Packer. I'm a first vice president of the League, the Palo Alto League, and the editor of our voter. The League is a non-profit, partisan political organization whose mission is to encourage informed and active participation of citizens in government. The League does not support, oppose, or endorse candidates or parties, although it does work to influence public policy through education and advocacy. This forum is funded by the League of Women Voters Education Fund, which, through contributions from members and community donors, is devoted entirely to our voter service activities. We are greatly appreciative for our co-sponsors, the participation of our co-sponsors for this forum, and these include the Mid-Peninsula Community Media Center, and they're taping this event, and that'll be shown on the Community Access channel, so check the Media Center's website for the times. The Palo Alto branch of the American Association of University Women, the Palo Alto Chamber of Commerce, Palo Alto Online, Palo Alto Weekly, the Unitarian Universalist Church of Palo Alto Action Council, and I want to thank the church for hosting this event today, and the Green Meadow Community Association. As I said, the forum is being filled by the Media Center, and the website to go to is communitymediacenter.net, and that's where you'll find the times when this forum and the other forums that they'll be taping throughout this election season will be aired. So for more information on the elections, we recommend that you visit smartvoter.org, and it says to pick up the Smart Voter bookmarks. Do we have those here today? They're on the back table, and I was supposed to hold up a Smart Voter bookmark, but you'll see it out there. And we will have our voter's guide, which has the pros and cons of the state ballot measures and the local ballot measures all laid out for you. And that's going to press in about a week and should be available by the end of the month or the beginning of October. So look for it in libraries and community centers, and if you're a member or donor to the League, you'll have one mailed to you. That's an incentive to become a member or donor. You may stay after the forum to meet and talk with the candidates personally, and their campaign materials are outside on that table. Are they also on the back table?
No, they're outside.
They're mostly outside in our patio. So now I would like to introduce Gloria, she's from the League of San Jose, Santa Clara, and she's the moderator for today's forum.
Thank you, Bonnie. It's a pleasure for me to be here. This forum, as you know, provides the opportunity for you all to hear from the 6 candidates who are running for Palo Alto City Council. And the 6 candidates in alphabetical order are Marc Berman, Pat Burt, Timothy Gray, Liz Kniss, Gregory Schmid, and Marc Weiss. Before we begin, I would like to just go over the format of our session. We are scheduled to be finished by 4 p.m. And to help us keep ourselves on track, we do have our timekeeper, Relly Davidson. Relly, if you could just wave. She will signal candidates with a yellow sign for 30 seconds left and a red sign when the time is up. The candidates have all received ground rules, and we'd like to also share them with you as well. There are some ground rules as well for the audience. Ground rules for the audience. 1, if you would like to ask a question of the candidates, they must be written on cards which are provided by the League at this forum. That will circulate them by volunteers in the audience, and the cards, if you will, should indicate if a question is directed to a specific candidate or to all. Please, because I'll be reading the questions, write them as legibly as possible. 2, please no audience demonstration, clapping, and so forth during the forum. 3, please turn off, if some of you have your cell phones with you, all electronic devices that might be. And we do not allow any cameras or photo-making devices that may be used during the forum. As you see, we have someone taping today for us. Ground rules for the candidates. There are no substitutes or stand-ins for the candidates. We're delighted to see all 6 candidates here. Candidate responses should pertain specifically to the question at hand, and I, as the moderator, get to interrupt a candidate if I believe that the candidate is straying from the subject. So I'll be listening carefully. 3, the moderator will enforce the time limits very firmly. It's really important because we do want to hear from each of the 6 candidates. The time signals will consist, as I mentioned earlier, of yellow and red cards. Again, 30 seconds before it is time, and then when the red card comes, I will say, thank you, your time is up, and ask that you stop speaking. I don't know if we will have the mic being able to turn off, but according to my notes, they will be turned off. 4, the candidates will not interrupt each other. Candidates will bring no props to the forum. I see that that's true. Each candidate is provided with a paper pad and pen for taking notes during the forum. As you can see, campaign materials may not be displayed in this room. The league has tables outside so that there are those materials outside. Again, we are taking written questions from you, and this allows us to cover as wide a range of issues as possible, and we have wonderful volunteers from the league who will be taking a look at all the questions. They are there to review the questions so that there's not repetition, or they may collect them together. And we do have league members who will collect the questions if you just raise your hand. Now, the cards, and you should indicate if a particular question is directed to an individual candidate. But we really do prefer that as many as possible, those questions be directed to all candidates. Our question sorters will sort and review the cards and group the questions by topic. And I want to thank our volunteers there on your right, Karen Sunback, Evan Laurie, and Nancy Olson for helping out as sorters. We will start with a 3-minute opening statement from each candidate. Candidates will have drawn numbers for the order of speaking, and they're actually seated now in that order. We will have the questions that we have collected from the audience, and the candidates will be asked in varying order for each question, and we'll have 1.5 minutes. 1.5 minutes to respond to those questions, okay? And I remind candidates to, if you can, you don't have to spend all of 1.5 minutes. We'll have a closing statement from each candidate of up to 2 minutes, and they will speak in the reverse order of the opening statements. A final note, in the interest of time, and so we can keep this as nonpartisan environment as possible. Again, no applause or demonstrations or noises from the audience would be much appreciated. And at the end of the forum, we will then be able to show our thanks with an applause. So let us now begin, now that we have all the instructions, okay? Again, a 3-minute opening statement, and again, you don't have to use all 3 minutes. We'll begin with Tim Gray.
My name is Timothy Gray, and I live here in Palo Alto with my 3 children, my wife on Park Boulevard, resident of the Charleston Meadows neighborhood. And I'm going to try to keep this short and kind of model what city council meeting might be like. And also I'd like to get to the standard. My background is that I worked at the Packard Children's Hospital, built the finance team from the ground up, and left there in 1997 with the merger of UCSF. My children are 10, Michael and Julie, who attend Wanabrioni's elementary school. My daughter Catherine that attends Terminal Middle School, and my wife Susan works at the Packard Children's Hospital. I want to look at this as a voter. I want to find out about responsible spending that makes room for regular repair of aging infrastructure. Excuse me. And I want to build a future with sustainable financial balance. want openness, transparency, and fairness in all council actions. And I'd like to curb abuse of zoning loopholes that do not honor the spirit of the city's comprehensive plan. I want to stand for fair utility rates by protecting the integrity of fees charged to the utility enterprise fund. And I want to filter all actions through the lens of environmental responsibility. And what better reason to do anything in life than for the benefit of your community? That's why I'm running.
Mr. Ray, thank you. Now, Pat Burt.
Thank you for the chance to talk with you about the challenges and opportunities facing our community. Although you may know me from my service on the council and as mayor in 2010, I'd like to share with you more about my background, my values, and my goals and accomplishments. I grew up here in Santa Clara Valley. My parents were both teachers in Cupertino and Los Altos. My wife Sally and I have lived in Palo Alto for almost 30 years now. We've lived in College Terrace neighborhood, University South, and now Community Center. We have 2 kids in school, Carolyn and Riley. Nearly 20 years ago, after our daughter was born, I became active as a neighborhood leader in the community. I then served 9 years on the Planning and Transportation Commission before being elected to the City Council. When I first ran for council, I believed that my background and skills in business, neighborhood building, environmental policy, and the workings of our city government would help me be a strong leader. I also believed that the performance of our city government had been declining gradually. While the near-term costs and long-term financial obligations of that government were rising rapidly. Without change, we would face fewer of the services that we so value in Palo Alto. I'm proud of my first term serving Palo Alto as a city council member. As the city faced severe economic downturn, I led by making our government more efficient and effective. I focused on reforming our pension and benefit obligations. We've also reduced the number of city workers by 13% without layoffs, while maintaining our high level of services. Our staff has become more innovative and agile and has increased efficiency. In short, we are doing more with less. I've also focused on protecting and improving our exceptional quality of life. I advocated for a responsible rail plan that safeguards our community and negotiated a well-considered development agreement for renovating the Stanford hospitals. We have improved our city services and increased investments in our streets, bikeways, parks, libraries, and facilities. Of course, we haven't done it alone. We've collaborated with community partners to maintain our exceptional assets, even during challenging times for cities everywhere. These partnerships helped us leverage our resources to rebuild our libraries, parks, and facilities, and to prepare us for emergencies, and create a more sustainable community. I'm grateful to all who contribute to making our community better. My passion for our community is stronger than ever. That's why I'm running for a second term. I'm committed to continuing my leadership to make our city more innovative, more efficient, and more fiscally sound for the long term. Palo Alto is a model of a dynamic local economy. Thank you.
Thank you. Liz Kniss.
Thank you very much, and welcome everyone. It's great to see you all. Thanks to the League once again for doing these forums that I think are so important for our community, so you get to see us, you get to know what we're saying, and you get to know what we're like. I'm running because I think we're at a crossroads in our community. I think the best indicator of that is between 2000 and 2011, we grew at more than 10%. We were considered built out years ago, and yet we have added that many people. At the same time, we have become more diverse ethnically, which I think is a wonderful opportunity for us to rejoice in our differences and to celebrate the differences that we have in our community. I think, and I know you all feel grateful to have such a range of cultural opportunities. At the same time that this growth has taken place and the number of households has also grown, the number of kids in school has grown. It's now growing at 2% a year, which is a pretty dramatic change. The population, by the way, in Palo Alto is about 58,000 10 years ago. We're now at 65,000. We've gotten a lot bigger. So why am I running? I have done this before, and I've had the great privilege of serving you before. I think what I have is a long-term perspective from living here a long time, from serving a long time, but I think a very fresh approach. I've had the great privilege of serving all of you at the county level now for many years, and also had the good fortune to be involved at the state level, to serve on our board there, and also at the national level. It's given me unusual access to the state and to the national, and to opinion leaders throughout our country. It's a fascinating perspective to have had. I've served on both the VTA and on the Caltrain boards, also broadened my view a great deal, and a very realistic view at our transportation system. You probably know we're a big county. We're a county known throughout the entire country. A county I feel very proud to live in, and a city I feel very proud to represent. I'll touch on some challenges, and maybe there'll be questions about those. Certainly our infrastructure instantly comes to mind as a challenge. Although many other aspects exist, we worry about our police station, we worry about other aspects, parks and so forth. What people mention to me the most often are our streets and sidewalks. And as we push more and more biking to school, which has become very successful, we want those streets and those sidewalks to be really safe. We don't want people tripping. We don't want bikes falling into a pothole. So I think that should be one of our aims, even though the council has added to that number of dollars. How does it go so fast? So thank you, and I can finish up the challenges on my second turn.
Thank you. Mr. Marc Berman.
So I want to start off by thanking the members of the League of Women Voters for organizing today's forum, and for all of you for joining us to discuss the future of this community that we all love. People often ask me if I've ever been elected to anything before. Absolutely. Everything that I know now, I learned as the 10-year-old co-vice president of Duveneck Elementary School right across town. A lot has changed in the 22 years since then. I've changed. I went on to graduate from Jordan and Pali. I moved to Washington, D.C. to attend Georgetown University. I worked on major political campaigns in South Dakota, Louisiana, and Kentucky. And then I moved back to California to attend USC Law School, and then back home to practice law. But a lot has remained the same over the last 22 years. For instance, a lot of our major infrastructure assets in Palo Alto, most of which were built in the 50s and 60s, haven't changed, and are now outdated and in danger of becoming obsolete, or in danger of failing when we need them most. This is why I served on the recent Infrastructure Blue Ribbon Commission, and the council will be very focused on infrastructure over the next few years, and I look forward to bringing my experience and perspective to those deliberations. Growing up in Palo Alto can be a wonderful experience. Many of us are the children of successful parents who went to top colleges and graduate schools. We're a stone's throw away from one of the best universities in the world, and as the heart of Silicon Valley, we attract the most talented people from across the globe. However, growing up in Palo Alto isn't without its challenges. In fact, the last time that I ever sat on the city council dais was 14 years ago, when as president of the senior class at Pali, I was invited to join other student leaders from Pali and Gunn to talk about some of the pressures that the youth face growing up in our community. With the acceleration of technology and the advent of social media, those pressures have only become more pronounced. As a community leader who was in their shoes only 14 years ago, I hope to work with Palo Alto's youth to facilitate understanding, acceptance, and utilization of the city's available mental health services. One thing that has changed for the worse over the last decade, and that we must address moving forward, is the level of unfunded pension and healthcare liabilities on the city's books. While difficult decisions remain, we must conduct all discussions in a civil way that respects the hard work and dedication of our staff, the vast majority of whom can't afford to work or can't afford to live in the city where they work. I'm honored to have the support of many community leaders, including Congresswoman Ann Ashew, State Senator Joe Simitian, State Assemblyman Rich Gordon, every current council member who's not also running this year, and 4 school board members. And I hope to earn your support too. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Gregory Schmid.
Welcome and thank you for coming. I'm a 40-year resident of Palo Alto. My 4 kids grew up here in town. I've been on the school board. Last 4 years I've been on the city council. I'm an economist and planner by background and training. And I want to share with you how I think about things. There are 2 critical overriding strategic issues the city has to face. One, its sources of revenues lag behind the growth in income. 75% of our revenues come from property taxes and sales taxes. Both of those are capped and regressive. Property tax has a cap of Prop 13, and there's a footnote to Prop 13. It says businesses are treated differently than residences. So each year in the county, businesses pay a smaller share of property taxes. Unfortunately, the city pays for services, and services grow faster. The cost of services grow faster. If you look at our sales tax revenue, for example, sales tax is on goods. But we as consumers spend an increasing share of our expenditures on services. The city does as well. We buy services. So there's constraint on our income and growth in the cost of our services. Every decision we make on the council, we have to take that into account and plan. We look toward the future with growth, but office growth is now the most desirable part of the city's expansion. And yet offices provide fewer revenues to the city than single-family residences on the same property. It's striking and startling, the limitation on the direct revenues to the city from office growth. It's not that offices aren't bad for the future of the city, because they provide jobs, revenue, and attract young families. But the implication is clear. A successful expansion of office space works when you can put it into the context of livability in the city. Everyone in the city benefits if public benefits flow from new office development back to the residents of the city. We all benefit that way. So strategic consideration as we move down the road and face an uncertain and probably growing future.
Thank you. Marc Weiss.
I am reminded of the joke about the Zen Buddhist and the hot dog vendor who says, "Make me one with everything." I admit to a degree of trepidation about appearing here today, Shabbat, the Jewish Sabbath, campaigning, and at a church, even a Unitarian Universalist. I've been to events here before, but not on Shabbat. And then, if you permit the segue, I started thinking about the old adage that politics and lawmaking are like making sausage. Maybe you don't want to know what goes in your sausage. And that my campaign is about questioning the current leadership with due respect and challenging the status quo and trying to get transparency about how decisions are made here, more than about my own merits, perhaps. This is, for some, if you excuse the pun, a worst-case scenario. I am a gun graduate where I was editor of the student newspaper. Ms. Tucker was our school board president. Her son was my classmate. And I was also an editor of my college daily at Dartmouth. And I went through a reporter training program at the Times Tribune here in Palo Alto in 1984 and actually covered local council meetings then.
More recently, I've been following our local self-governance, as I call it, quite avidly these last 4 years, and I'm very concerned with how things are being done here now, and I know I'm not alone. I'm an advocate of what I call a new residentialist platform, as distinct from what I perceive as a downtown or developer mandate. I hope to get the chance over the next 50 days to earn your vote and to get the pendulum swinging back in the direction of the people who live here. I want to thank the UUCPA and the League of Women Voters for having us here today.
Thank you. Now, before we go to the questions from the audience, we are allowing each candidate to ask a question of another candidate, if they have one. And we'll start with Tim Gray.
This is a question for another candidate that's at the table with me. Is that correct? Yes. My question, I guess, would be for Liz. And as a voter, I'm looking for someone who will bring about some financial discipline to the city. And we have about a $400 million infrastructure deficit. And one of my commitments is not to look at the past, but to look at the future on where we're going. And so, what are your ideas for being able to set aside a solid percentage of money to make up for that infrastructure deficit? And how would that be different than some of our history in decisions in Palo Alto, with all due respect?
Before that question is answered, I'd like to just remind all of our candidates that you should limit your question to 30 seconds, and the response is 1 minute each. And you will have a chance for a 1 minute rebuttal.
Could you repeat that?
Yeah, the response is limited to 1 minute, and the questioner, yes, has a 1 minute rebuttal opportunity.
Good. Am I ready? Yes? No? Thanks. I understand now what she was trying to say. Thanks, Tim. That is a seriously good question. Let me tell you where I would go with this, and it's exactly where we went at the county, and I helped lead that campaign. It's time for Palo Alto to have an infrastructure bond, and I realize that asking all of you to contribute more to your infrastructure is probably not going to be popular, but I also think Greg's point to Prop 13 is extremely important. The split roll that he's gone into is one of the things that I thought would be a great idea for years. But in order to really have the infrastructure, to have that kind of money you need, you will have to go out for bond. And I hope that if I am on the council, and I plan to be, that I can help lead that effort. And I think all of you who are here would support just that kind of thrust for us to become far more effective in our infrastructure spending.
Thank you. And Tim, did you have a response?
Well, some would say that that's passing our past sins and lack of discipline onto our children. And so we may need now, we can't go back into the past and correct our indiscretions and our lack of financial discipline, but we need to set aside a certain amount so that it doesn't repeat itself and we don't have to have a bond issue 20 years from now. And maybe there's a showing of fiscal responsibility to the voters that we fund some of it through saving, and then we go to the bonds for the future. And so I hope there's a balance, and I would advocate for more discipline and less pushing off to the future.
Thank you. The next question is Pat Burt.
Well, I will direct my question to Marc Berman. Marc, if you think first, imagine 4 years from now, and you look back, if you've had an opportunity to serve on the city council, what do you anticipate you would be most proud of having achieved?
Thank you for the question, Pat. And that's a very good one. And following along from the previous question and discussion, I think certain improvements to infrastructure would probably be something that I'm very qualified to bring my expertise into those discussions. And then B, I think it's something that's vitally important for the future of Palo Alto and for my kids, who I don't have yet. So, along those lines, I think one thing that we absolutely need is an infrastructure, or is a new public safety building. And if there's a question on that, I'll extrapolate on that. I also think something that the Infrastructure Commission recommended that doesn't get as much kind of attention is an infrastructure management system. Part of the reason that we got to the situation that we're in is that the city wasn't tracking all of its infrastructure assets in a single format. And so there wasn't a way for the council to look and see the big picture and understand that we were falling behind, which we were for a long time. So implementation of that infrastructure management system, I think, is achievable over the next 4 years. A new public safety building, and articulating to the community why we need a new public safety building is something that I think will come across in the next 4 years, and I'm not sure how much time I have. But I'll leave it at that, and I can extrapolate it if there are individual questions later.
Thank you, Mr. Berman. I think we're just about to run out. Mr. Burt, did you have a response?
Well, just a follow-up. I certainly agree that this is a very large, very important issue for our community going forward. During my term as mayor, we created the Infrastructure Blue Ribbon Commission and appointed it, and they have done an outstanding job of identifying the issues. And the council has already taken that and has taken this last year under Mayor Ye to have a whole series of retreats around the infrastructure because, as the other speakers have pointed out, we've been able to identify the problem well, but coming up with a solution is going to be a great challenge.
Thank you, Mr. Berman. I think that was the timer, was it? Kniss, did you have a question?
Yes. Let me ask mine of Greg. We'll take turns as we go down here. And Greg, I just referenced this same issue, but Prop 13 is always the enormous elephant in the room. You spoke briefly about how we deal with our businesses. I have, as I said, supported split roll for a long time. Do you have any other answer to this? You've spoken of this as regressive. I would be willing to bet most of the people here in this room have a low tax level. I'd almost be willing to bet that. And I think many of them might be willing to pay more. So can you address that issue? Maybe they would be willing to pay more.
Thank you.
Good question. Prop 13 reform is in the hands of the state and must be initiated and carried out by the state. I think clearly do roles in which businesses lose this special exemption of not being updated even when properties turn over is a good first step. I think another factor is that turnover of old homes. Half of our increase in revenue each year is accounted for by the attraction of new families moving into town and displacing.
Thank you. Sorry, again, it's a 1 minute response. Kniss, did you want to respond?
And a good start, I think, Greg, but I would take it a step further. What I think is that we actually can begin reform at home. While it's a state issue, it's one that you all voted on in 1978, or many of you did. Was that the end? Oh, sorry. Am I in the middle or the end, or where am I?
I think you may be helpful to have the paddles. I think it may be a little bit confusing. I'm going to just spend a minute with the time just encouraging us to use the cards. With the switchbook times going from a minute to a minute and a half, we're having to play with that a little bit. So. We're resetting the timer, so you have a full minute when you get started. Okay.
And can you tell me what I have left when we get it reset?
Are we ready?
I'm on?
Yes.
Okay. So this is now an answer to Greg's question. As I mentioned, I really think that with Prop 13, it is the kind of thing we can start at home. Actually, Prop 13 was started practically on our own backyard with Jarvis and Gann. At that time, I don't think anyone ever thought it would last for this long a period of time. If those of you who are here are still as bothered as I am by this inequity, by the fact that we're 47th in our schools, just ranked 47th again in business climate, and find that as disturbing as I do, I think that is one of the roads that we could take. We could begin as an active community to begin that Prop 13 discussion again, and at some point we'll need to redistribute the initiative that allows it to go back on the ballot. Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Berman, your question?
So my question is going to be, well, good tit for tat. My question is going to be for Pat. Now that the Alma Plaza development is being built, a lot of people are beginning to question kind of the process that we took to approve that project, and in particular how it looks from Alma and the kind of impact that has. And I know that that was a decision that was made before you were on the council, but do you have any suggestions for how, have we changed the process to fix that already, or are there steps that we can take moving forward?
Well, I'd say two things. One, yes, I was on the Planning and Transportation Commission when that project was approved. We as a commission actually opposed that design and that scale of development as a majority of our commission. Part of the problem was the process that existed on the council at the time, and we have done certain reforms to require that there can't be last-minute submittals of changed plans, and that there be greater transparency to the public on this. And ultimately, we had an issue of a developer who said, if you don't give me what I want, it's going to stay weeds for decades. And so, frankly, the city council blinked. And the planning commission didn't agree with it. But that's how some of the decision-making can occur. The city, in some circumstances, is limited in what they can impose, but I think that this is where having strong experience and willingness to stand up for community values is critical.
Thank you. Mr. Gregory Schmid, your question?
Yeah, question for Liz. We just had a vote at City Council to move ahead on a joint project with Stanford on the trails, bikes, pathways. Reaching out for funding from Stanford. With your experience on the county and elsewhere, how much of the bike and pedestrian plan and the IBRIC report are really open for partnerships with other branches of government?
Could I ask Greg for a restate of part of the question? I want to make sure I answer it correctly.
If you would briefly restate it.
Yeah, just the very last piece of it, Greg. Are you asking about the partnership between the city and the county?
Just the sources of funds, which may be important inputs to the IBRIC plan.
Talking about the funds between the city and the county, there are only certain funds which are available, and they're part of the general use permit. And under the general use permit, there were 2 trails required. One of the trails was never built, and the ultimate, it ultimately returned to us in the form of money rather than in the form of a trail. It has come back to us at about $10.5 million, which is a very nice amount to have. I have already suggested that we consider carefully the Lefkowitz Bridge, which is the Adobe Creek Bridge, and also other of the bike trails, and also connectivity that would go out to the bay. So I feel pretty strongly about how we go about spending this money. I think this can be a great advantage to Palo Alto, both for safely crossing 101 and a great opportunity for us to increase our bike trail safety. But in particular, I think what's important is this great opportunity for the county to work with the city, and it has been an unusual opportunity to have this amount of money.
Thank you. Mr. Schmid, your response?
Yeah, thanks, Liz. I think it was a great opportunity, and as I look at the IBRIC report, which is an extremely valuable strategic plan, I think that basically half the funding could be coming from Caltrans, the state, the Fed, the Santa Clara Valley Water District, Stanford projects, VTA, and regional bodies. So I think we need to look at those opportunities when we talk and think about the IBRIC.
Thank you. Mr. Marc Weiss, your question?
This is for Mr. Schmid. To what extent do you concur with the widespread and growing concern that PC zoning is being abused and that the public is being shortchanged in the public benefits statute?
I think PC has been used fairly frequently, and especially in the last 6 months or so. It's a critical area in which variances in zoning or buildings are requested in response for public benefits. We do not have a clear strategic notion of how to think about public benefits in a general sense, and it's a critical long-term input to our city infrastructure and the livability of the community. So it's essential that the council define what and how to think of public benefits. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Weiss, do you have a response?
I think also the variances were supposed to be to provide flexibility in type of use, and what we're seeing is people asking for to build bigger and taller and more dense. And I think people are getting more and more upset. If you look at for example, the posts in the Palo Alto Weekly, after their articles you can post, and many people are upset about a lot of the recent, as you say, a flurry of projects in the last 6 months. And I also found it useful to go back for the League of Women Voters website from the 2009 elections, and some of the candidates commenting on this, specifically Karen Holman, who I believe was once part of the PATC Planning Commission, was asked to look at PC zoning. So I think it should be a big part of this campaign is looking at PC zoning, specifically how to amend it or maybe to get rid of it.
Thank you. That ends this portion where the candidates get to ask each other questions, and we saw the fiery discussion there. Now let's go to the questions from you, the audience. Now, this first question looks like it's for each member, so I'll sort of do it randomly. And I'll read the questions, and for this question, let us start with, well, we'll start in the same order. We'll start with Tim, and then we'll just come down the line, if that's okay. So it's a minute and a half. A minute and 30 seconds. So there are actually 2 questions, please note. One, what is your position about a proposed vehicle habitation ban? I don't know what that is, but it passed through. Okay, so being not from Palo Alto, I'm sorry. And then the question, should anticipated revenue from Stanford mitigate homelessness? There really are 2 questions. So why don't we take the first one? What is your position about a proposed vehicle habitation ban?
Well, I don't think that it's ever effective to ban something because that doesn't solve the problem. Prohibition, that's like trying to cure the common cold by banning sneezing. We have to get before the problem. We can't go around banning things. I think the public benefit that we receive from from the Stanford project, from any number of measures we collect from the PC zoning, homelessness needs to have a place at the table, and it is something that we need to not sweep under the rug. I've talked to an officer who has told me that every single one of the people that he talks to, there is a place for them. And we need to continue working with a very compassionate approach that the police department has taken and continue the progress we've made, and not with just blindly ban things, but also commit more resources to it.
Thank you. Mr. Burt, it looks like Mr. Gray responded to both questions, so if you could do the same as well.
Thank you. Well, you may be aware that starting over 6 months ago, the City Council asked staff to commission a task force to look at this issue. It was really in response to certain, I think, exceptions where we had abuses going on in neighborhoods of vehicles that were people who were misusing the streets. And what appears to be coming out of it, we'll be hearing about the report and recommendations in the next month or so, is some modifications to what we have, not a wholesale ban, at least not at the outset, and look at how we can address the abuses of the situation without a wholesale transformation. We do have many stories of people in our community who are, but for the grace of God, not the circumstances that we encounter. They have been longtime residents who lost their livelihood and are really trying to do the best they can. We do have other circumstances where neighborhoods are experiencing some conduct that is unacceptable. And I think that we're going to be able to come up with tweaks and changes, at least initially, to see how successful we can be at that. In addition, we're looking at collaborating with faith institutions who are looking at sponsoring being able to have a very limited number of vehicles on their sites at a time.
Thank you, Mr. Burt. Same question to Liz Kniss.
For the most part, cities surrounding us do have a ban against people sleeping in their cars. And the reason is obvious, and I think Pat just referenced it. It is, as he mentioned delicately, how does one take care of their daily needs when they're living in their car? And that's what becomes so awkward. It's why in a number of places they have looked to churches. They've looked to churches both as an intermediate place for people to stay, to spend the night, and to use the facilities there. To go on to, I think the rest of that question had to do with Stanford, and I think that has to do with the money that has come into the city. However, there's also a fair amount of money that has come into the city from Stanford's general use permit. And that is, since I have been at the county level, we have brought about $15 million into the city for both low and very low income housing, which is what is the requirement. In this, and also in this community, you have the Opportunity Center, which is located close to the Palo Alto Medical Foundation, and that is a very good place for people to go during the daytime. There are also opportunities there to apply and to become a resident. So I think Palo Alto has offered, both through Stanford's general use permit money and also what I think is money coming in, a fair opportunities for that population.
Thank you. Same question to Mr. Berman.
So rather than a blanket prohibition, I think we should attempt to solve this situation in a more creative way. And as Pat mentioned, and others have as well, you know, we need to be sympathetic to the fact that innocent people get forced into unexpected situations where their only option is to live in their car. And I was looking into this issue a couple of nights ago, and there was an article that talked about, you know, a woman who was escaping an abusive spouse, or somebody who'd lost their job and couldn't afford to live in their home anymore. These were, you know, Palo Alto residents who Palo Alto is their home, and prohibiting their ability to live in their car. What's the next step? Is homelessness, and I don't think that's the right solution either. So there have been some situations where people have, you know, taken advantage of the lack of a prohibition, and we need to put into place measures to try to penalize that when it happens, and try to make sure that it doesn't happen in the first place. But I don't think a blanket prohibition is a good idea. I'm looking forward to hearing the recommendations that come back from the task force that was created by the City Council. And in regards to using Stanford money, you know, if a plan is recommended that needs funding, and if we have money from the Stanford funds available, I think that would be a decent connection to look at. So I'll stick with that.
Thank you, Ms. Berman. Mr. Schmid.
I'm in favor of the current public-private partnership discussions. I think the elements of it include registration with the city, limitation on numbers, off-road parking dispersed in the city, restrooms availability, counseling made as part of the deal, and a limited duration in time.
Thank you. Did you, with your time, want to respond to the second part of the question about the revenues? Well, I guess that was the end of the time. Mr. Weiss, same question.
My response is from the book of Matthew, that which you've done for the least of my brethren, so have you done for me.
Thank you. The next question, again, a two-part question, and this time we will start with Mr. Burt. How do we fight ABAG numbers to maintain a quality of life in Palo Alto, and how do we provide more reasonably priced housing?
Well, first, the ABAG allocation is something that we as a council have been addressing for over 4 years now. Councilmember Schmid and myself are both on our housing subcommittee, now standing committee of the City Council. And in Palo Alto, we believe that we've been allocated a disproportionate share of the regional housing, and on top of that, they really have a deep fallacy in how they have projected the needs for the future. Frankly, the state's demographers have been flat out wrong repeatedly and have just been proven wrong again, and they're inflating the numbers. In Palo Alto, when we have zoning to accommodate that, it has tended to be built or overbuilt. Thus drives what has really been this explosive growth in our school population, which is a great struggle for our community. We accept our fair share of the regional housing, but not exceeding that fair share. Remind me of the second half.
How do we provide more reasonably priced housing?
Well, Palo Alto has been a leader in affordable housing programs for a very long time. So we have inclusionary housing, we have partnerships with nonprofits, including the Palo Alto Housing Corp. We have a new project coming up in the next week to the City Council that is for affordable senior housing, but it is not going to be an easy task in the community where housing has this kind of cost.
Thank you, Mr. Burt. Liz Kniss?
So to go back a little on the ABAG numbers, one of the complexities of this was a Senate bill that was passed some time ago now, which was Senate Bill 375, which has maintained and essentially stipulated that throughout the state of California, there must be essentially a nexus between housing, between land use, between transit. So this is the attempt by the Association of Bay Area Governments to impose that number of houses on each community without, I think, frequently looking at the numbers they have built before or other stipulations that may exist within that city. I think these numbers have been very difficult in the past, but in the past they didn't have quite the stick that they have with them now. There's now an essential punishment, a financial punishment, if you don't comply with the ABAG numbers. I actually think it's time for cities to look back and to talk about how they can deal more substantially with ABAG and how they can come back at the numbers more realistically. The last question had to do, I think, with low-income housing. I think I mentioned that the county money, which has come in, has gone almost exclusively into low-income housing and low-income housing. Palo Alto, I think, has done a good job with the provision of that kind of housing.
Thank you, Marc. Berman, same question.
So I think it's important for Palo Alto to accept and meet its obligation of increased housing based on the increased population in the Bay Area for a couple of reasons. One is for climate change mitigation measures, and a second, creating more housing where the jobs are. Another reason is to create a more diverse community. I think back too often to my 7th grade teacher at Jordan, Ron Perry, who was a couple of years out of Stanford. He was a wrestler, big guy, and he was our social studies teacher, and one of the best teachers I ever had. And he either the year after I had him or 2 years after I had him, he moved his family to Portland because he couldn't afford to raise a family within 50 miles of Palo Alto on a teacher's salary. So I think it's important that we keep that in mind, as we address this issue. At the same time, as Pat mentioned, and as I know Greg's written a white paper on that I'm still trying to understand because it's very technical. ABAG's numbers might be off, and I think it's important to push back on that if we think that's the case. And so it's a balance. It's a tightrope between doing our fair share, but making sure that our share is fair, I guess. And so I think that's what we need to do.
Thank you, Mr. Schmid.
I think the critical issue with ABAG is that they don't accept the fact that California is a maturing state. Demographically speaking, we are not back with the Beach Boys in the 1960s anymore. But demographic growth in the state is limited. ABAG consistently has overstated numbers. In the decade up to 2010, they overestimated growth rates by some 89%. The Department of Finance, which has the official state demographer, adjusted when they heard the numbers and said we have to rethink this. But for the period 2010 to 2040, ABAG is still forecasting a 30% growth in Bay Area population. The state demographer is down at 17%. So ABAG needs to adjust to the fact that California is a different demographic state. At the same time, the fact of identifying growth corridors and concentrated growth in dense and transit-served areas makes a lot of sense, and there's no debate with that issue. It's the base demographic numbers.
Thank you. Mr. Weiss?
I kind of wish ABAG was more with the Beach Boys and that maybe we could build more housing in Southern California. Not to be an NIMBYist, but, and I definitely value economic diversity and low income. I grew up here, I'm a renter, I can't really afford to buy here yet, maybe with my parents' help, but I think we do have the right to push back against ABAG. I'm anxious to read Mr. Schmid's report as well and be more efficient at describing this. Incidentally, as Mr. Burt referred to, there are at least two projects kind of on the dockets right now. Maybell Avenue, a lot of it's senior housing, but I've heard neighbors say that maybe there's too many units and the units are too small. Also, the trailer park in Berman Park is in play. And according to Amy French of the city staff, the applicant wants to triple the density allowed on that site. So I think citizens and or council and or commissions have to hold the line and on projects, and we have the right to try to resist ABAG, and even if we have to brush against some kind of punishment.
Thank you. The next question is, and we will start with, oh, I'm sorry too. My apologies. Same question about fighting ABAG numbers and reasonably priced housing.
We definitely can't let ABAG push us to become a city we don't want to be. And their numbers have been allocated among what I consider artificial political boundaries, and it really needs to be addressed as a region. And I think it's time to knock on some doors and see if we can find a more regional answer to the real need of balancing housing and jobs. We have to look at our own comprehensive plan and see where in our comprehensive plan do we have housing availability as prescribed before we let this artificial number be used by developers to push us into becoming a very congested and dense town, and that will erase the environment that we love.
Thank you. I think now we will go to the next question. And we will start with you, Liz, and I'll try to remember Tim and Pat so we don't forget you. The question is, very simply, but very difficult, how will you control city staff pension cost?
That's going to be the question I think that most of us grapple with. And I did bring just a helper here. This is from something that ran this summer, and it talks about the city's pension expenses have grown. It goes way back. It looks like this. I would commend the city, however, for making the changes that they have so far. One of the difficulties, and we have faced it in my current job as well, is when you have an established number of employees who work for you, how do you change that which they have as a contract with you? It's particularly important as you're dealing with PERS, which is the Public Employees Retirement System, and also that you have another contract that you negotiate with them on a regular basis. We tried successfully at the county, and I think the city could or would head in the same direction, is to have new employees treated differently. I think 3 ways that you can look at this substantially at this point is to raise the retirement age. The second one would be to raise the amount that the employee contributes to the employer's share, which is somewhat complicated, and also look at limiting what is called the payout. When someone leaves, they can actually accumulate the sick leave. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Berman.
As Liz mentioned, this is an incredibly complicated issue, and I wish there were, but there's clearly no one silver bullet that's going to get our city back onto a financially sustainable path. And it's going to take more difficult decisions. A lot of difficult decisions have already been made. The question is not only how do we control staff pension costs, but also how do we do that while trying to maintain the breadth and quality of services that Palo Altans have come to expect. And I think Liz touched upon a couple of the solutions that we're going to have to continue doing. One is increasing, probably continuing to incrementally increase the employee contribution to pension and healthcare and dental and vision. I was reading through one of the contracts and noticed that I don't think those 2 aspects were included. Another is, what was another one? Following the governor's lead and the state legislature's lead in creating a cap on pensions, which recently passed in the California legislature. I think it was $110,000 a year for some employees and $130,000 for others, and I think that's something that the city should look at also to try to mitigate these huge pension payouts that some members of our staff are receiving.
Thank you. Mr. Schmid?
Benefits are clearly a critical financial issue for the city. They've been growing over the last 10 to 15 years at about 6% per year. Our revenue base is growing at 2 or 3% per year. What that means is money available for wages is actually being squeezed. 1/2 of the workers in the city are within 10 years of retirement age. How do we attract young people who have alternative work opportunities to the city, good quality workers for the city? You have to be able to offer them, especially young workers, wages that are competitive in the market. So we need to deal with pensions. 10 years ago, pensions accounted for were equivalent to 25% of wages. This last year, it was at 57% of wages. Same trends continue for another decade. It will be the same as wages. So increasingly, we are paying for people who are not working in town rather than those working. Some of the other members here have talked about things that need to be done, but we need to address that seriously.
Thank you, Mr. Weiss.
I'm a bit of a contrarian here. I think the topic of benefits is a little bit overplayed, and I ran for office in 2009, and somewhere in the interim, as I've been following this, I believe Commissioner Ray Bichetti wrote a letter saying, let's try not to demonize our civil servants. And it was, when we're negotiating with the unions, some of the rhetoric is a little bit too heavy-handed. I'm not an economist, but I'm trying to read where I can. I sort of think of myself as, although a layperson, a Keynesian. I'm reading Robert Reich. I'm reading Stieglitz. At Stanford, I still like Fuchs and Arrow, old school economists. And I wonder, can we raise revenue? That's not a popular way to look at it these days, but I think I still think a lot of Palo Altans demand excellence from our public servants, and we're willing to pay for it.
Thank you. That was the 30 seconds?
Yeah.
Okay. Mr. Gray?
Yes. We definitely can't break our commitments, break our contractual commitments, but there are ways to implement a two-tier system. We do want to pay top dollar for our talent and recruit top talent for the city. But I think that there's, if you look into the details, there's some anecdotal evidence that we are way out of line for what we offer, especially in private market compared to the city employees, long-term, the lifetime health care, the pension benefits. So we just have to start with a new recruiting class and pay a different scale and start what is reasonable and really get down to a position by position recruitment. Because I know there's anecdotal evidence of a clerk that a recruiter said they could get for me, for my private business, for $50,000, but in the city it's costing us $137,000. And so there's some definite inequities built into our system that we have to flush out. This is another example of previous. Nobody was looking at the books, and the rooster has come home to roost.
Thank you, Mr. Burt.
Well, it's a complex subject with 60 seconds, but in short, when Councilmember Schmid and I took office, we had a ticking time bomb. After the financial crisis, that fuse started burning a lot faster. But we were actually the first city in the county to implement many of the things that some of the other candidates were just asking for. They're already done for our city to a great degree. We were the first to have a two-tiered pension system and significant reforms there, but by law it can only apply to new employees. We now have just completed the final revision to, we have a series of different employee unions where the employees are paying their entire share of the retirement fund that is the employee share, which is a very significant reform. We've required that they are now paying a share of their current employee and retirement medical benefits, and that we had already reformed these abuses that were basically there on payouts at the end that were spiking pensions. Unfortunately, despite all of that, it's not enough. Our long-term pension liabilities are extremely high. CalPERS is still projecting what many of us believe to be artificially high rates of returns, and we're going to have even more problems to deal with. Fortunately, we saw some significant progress from the legislature in their pension reform, and cities needed to have that in order for us to do our next steps.
Thank you, Mr. Burt. The next question, and we'll start with Mr. Berman, is, and I'll read the question, How should the council weigh the views of corporations differently from individuals in planning and governance? Repeat that. How should the council weigh the views of corporations differently from individuals in planning and governance?
Well, I do not believe that corporations are people. But at the same time, you know, we have a lot of wonderful businesses in our community, from small businesses to incredibly large businesses, and I think it's important that the city council take everybody's concerns into account. It's kind of hard to answer that question in the abstract, but yeah, you know, it's important for the city council to receive input from everybody who might be impacted by the decisions that we make.
Thank you. Mr. Schmid.
I think from the city's perspective, an application, whether it comes from an individual or a corporation, needs to be treated the same within the zoning and comp plan rules. On the other hand, very large-scale applications which go through the process have the ability to request the maximum amount allowed that might have repercussions far beyond the boundaries of the application itself. And I think the city has a special requirement in its processes to make sure that the wider impacts of developments in town have a fair and open process where everybody, individuals and other businesses, have the right to say, here's the impacts that could affect me or them. I think these processes are critical to create that sense of a livability that we all share and need, both businesses and individuals.
Thank you. Mr. Weiss.
Corporations are not people. That's referencing a recent Supreme Court decision called Citizens United that many people are upset about. In fact, there's a nationwide and multi-levels initiatives that will state, hopefully towards a constitutional amendment, that corporations are not people and they do not have free speech. What this is referencing is on a national level, especially, corporations have been flooding elections with soft money, and people feel that undermines democracy. On a second level, I feel too much of the dais at City Council has been given as sort of corporate advertising for particular companies, brands, products. I was upset about the way we handled the opportunity to be part of a contest for a dark fiber ring. I've seen displays in the library for particular corporations, products, and services. I'm upset by the discussion of letting corporations name our parks and our playgrounds. This type of thing I find very disturbing. Democracy is one person, one vote, not $1, one vote.
Thank you. Mr. Gray.
Corporations are not people, and obviously we need to make our decisions with the residents' needs first. And I clearly have a bias towards that. But with that said, we need to include all voices at the table. For example, Stanford might be considered the biggest corporation in our area. And it has a voice, it collectively has a voice, but within that are the students, faculty, and such that also have a voice. But we, in the very end, after extracting and hearing all the voices, really have to do what's good for the residents, because this is where we live and this is our home, and we need to protect our home.
Thank you, Mr. Burt.
Well, the obligation of the City Council is to look at the broad interest of the community, and ultimately that is the interest of the residents. What we may differ on at different times with different residents is decisions and how those translate into the interests of the community. But for example, if we have a development project, or if we're being required to meet legally required housing development, then the City Council has to make difficult decisions that we try to balance both a good design, a good quality of project that will have minimal negative benefits and the most positive benefits for the community. But the example of Stanford and the negotiations we have had with them is very critical. Over the Stanford hospitals, we had some excellent agreements that ultimately came about as a result of dollars that were set aside for community health. We were able to create Project Safety Net in our community for the youth well-being, which is an extremely important, successful program. Dollars that have been set aside for sustainability in the community through that agreement, as well as from our prior general use permit for the trail system that we're going to benefit from. So these are things that come back and benefit the community. And we try to do our best at looking at the broad interests of the community and the residents.
Thank you, Mr. Burt. Ms. Liz?
I'm going to have to interpret this in a way because I think each of us are looking at it somewhat differently. I'm going to guess this question may have a lot to do with planned community zoning and whether or not when a business comes in, does it have more influence than you might come in as an individual and want something beyond that which is normally allowed under our zoning. I'm just going to guess that is the situation. We do have, again, a planned community, and I think Greg referenced this earlier, it probably needs more interpretation than it has currently had. If you come in and we impose the zoning on you because you want to expand your house, and yet a business comes in and asks for particularly unusual opportunities, you tend to feel as a resident that you have not been treated in the same way. And I'm going to guess that that is what this question actually meant. I'm not quite sure that it would have meant our corporations people, because as we look at that, corporations are of course made up of people. If we look, for example, at those who work at the city or those who work at a hospital, they're still all individuals. They all have individual needs. And sometimes it's tempting to clump it all into a corporation, but I think we need to recall that regardless of that, they are still a series of individuals. Many of them may live in our own community.
Thank you. The next question, and we'll start with Mr. Schmid. The question is, do you think that Palo Alto requires 9 members on the City Council? And would you support reducing the number to 7 only?
I think most communities around us have councils of 5. Few have 7. Very few have 9. It leads to longer meetings, more complex decision processes. But on the other hand, I have found that a diversity of perspectives on issues is not a bad thing. And in interim elections, to have a breath of fresh air with new members is not a bad thing. So I have come to accept the virtues of the 9. I certainly would not oppose reducing the number. I think it is important that in election time, what's critical is the number of candidates per seat. Traditionally, Palo Alto has had about 2.5, 2.6 candidates per seat, and it is disturbing that this year we have 0.6. I think what's important is that participation in government and the large council allows more members to participate.
Thank you. Mr. Weiss?
I think we should expand it to 11. Or maybe the 6 of us could agree to share the 4 seats, 4 weeks on, 2 weeks off. Gail Price, who I admire a lot, wrote a letter to the Weekly where she was talking about why there's so few candidates, and she thought it's because the meetings are so long, and I kind of beg to differ with due respect. in that I don't think government should move at the speed of the industry. I think government should move at the speed of the residents. And I think we should just shut down the meeting sooner and make them come back in the following week. And I was also moved by discussions in previous councils about civic engagement as a community value. And when I ran in 2009, Mr. Espinoza wrote a letter to the editor, or an op-ed piece, saying there were too few candidates. And so since then, I've been more engaged. And I've applied for commissions 3 times without being seated. And it's great that you all are here today. And I think more people should get more engaged. I think people, unfortunately, are very busy with their jobs. In terms of, democracy can become a vacuum if people don't speak up and or get involved.
Thank you, Mr. Gray.
I understand the efficiencies of a smaller council. However, there seems to be a danger of too concentrated of power. I did sit in a meeting with a labor union person 2 years ago who talked about how he wanted to find 4 seats so that they could, or 4 additional seats so they could lock up the vote on the labor contract that was coming to the city. So I think that if you have too small of a council and the ability of special interests to come in and influence would be much greater. Also, I'm an advocate of citizen participation, and I really like to see us, instead of coming together as a community every election time and having community conversations, having the council go to the community like this on an ongoing basis, so that election time isn't the only time to bring in the community. So I'm for more community involvement, and I think that broader representation serves that purpose.
Thank you, Mr. Burt.
Well, we have 9-member city council today because around 40 years ago we had the wisdom of a council to reduce it from 15 to 9. But having really observed intimately how a 9-member council works and neighboring communities that have 5- and 7-member councils, size is not a panacea, but I think our 9-member council is inefficient as a result of, or less efficient, I should say, as a result of its size. That a 7-member council would work more productively over the long term. And on top of that, we would have a better chance of achieving something that was a goal of mine that I think we met pretty well when I was mayor, which was to conduct the public's business in public while the public's awake. And so I think it would be an effective change for us in the city charter. It frankly is going to, if the change is going to occur, it needs to come from the grassroots, that it needs to be a community initiative and decision that that's what they'd like to see in a change, and the council can choose to support it, but ultimately these are the charter changes that occur as a result of having a good community support for them. I would endorse it.
Thank you, Ms. Kniss.
Thanks. I've had the good fortune to both serve on a 5-member school board, on a 9-member city council, and now on a 5-member board from the county. They're very different experiences. And I do think, I actually do think that one of 2 things needs to happen. Either it does need to be reduced to 7, or if you're going to have 9, you have to be very disciplined. The reason is that when you go beyond 10:30 or 11 at night, you still have staff sitting there waiting to answer your questions. You hopefully still have somebody watching at home. You might still have someone sitting in the audience. But if you start, as many times the council does, at 5 or 5:30, by 11, you're really not thinking, I think, quite as clearly or quite as effectively. So I would suggest either the 9 members become more disciplined, because I know the Palo Altans had mentioned that this is a problem. They don't want to stay up that late. They are troubled about decisions that get made late in the evening. So it's difficult to balance those two. However, if I had to say, I would say it's probably time to put that question out to our public again. And I also remember a former mayor saying, when term limits went in, fewer people would be running for office. That was probably 8 or 9 years ago. It's come to pass.
Thank you. Mr. Berman.
9 members allows for a greater breadth of diversity, and I think that's a good thing. 9 members also allows for more engagement in regional and state organizations, where we can either learn best practices from other regions, or maybe find ways to identify grants that we can apply for and obtain here in Palo Alto. I think that's a good thing. The Brown Act, which I think on the whole is a very good act for transparency in government, restricts the ability of colleagues to discuss issues up to a certain number of colleagues talking about one issue. And I think that I've heard from folks on council that they've appreciated the ability to toss out kind of loopy ideas to their peers, not in front of the microphone and the camera. And I think that's a good thing. So it's tough to say without having served, what the best or ideal situation would be. I think there are a lot of benefits to 9. I think we might lose a couple of those benefits if we drop down to 7, but I reserve the right to change my mind after a couple of 2 a.m. meetings.
Thank you very much. I'm not from Palo Alto, I'm from San Jose. But certainly just sitting here and listening to the breadth of responses, I am very convinced that these kinds of events do help you to hear from the candidates, to see how they think, how they respond. Sometimes not so much about the answers to how they respond and what they're thinking. And certainly I can see the diversity that you have here among the candidates. Now we wanted to close at 4, so that was the last question. I want to thank you for all of your good answers. And now we're at the point in time for closing statements. Each of you will have 2 minutes. And we will do it in the reverse order of the opening statements, and that means we will start with you, Mr. Weiss.
Well, I have a lot of respect for the people on the dais here today, and in certain ways I think Palo Alto would be well served if the 6 of us were all, like I was sort of jokingly saying, in that, I think Mr. Gray, Mr. Berman, and myself have fresh perspectives, and we certainly respect the sage leadership over the years and wisdom from Mr. Burt, Ms. Kniss, and Mr. Schmid. Obviously, on a closer inspection, maybe I'm being a little kind, because I think on certain levels, I hope that voters will choose me over some of the people on this council. And one thing I want to say about that distinguishes my candidacy is that I am the only candidate who will not accept contributions. And as I alluded to, I feel that on a national level, money has undermined democracy. And in sympathy with that, I am trying to run a campaign where I'm not spending money. I've been here since about '74, on and off. I have a history of community involvement, and dating back to the Student Council Award at Terman Middle School, where I was first semester student body president back in '77 and '78. And recently I've been writing a lot about the issues as I see them. I have a blog, and that is probably the heart of my campaign, is I'm trying to see whether if you search my name, Marc Weiss, and New Residentialist Platform, you will see various essays I've written. I guess I run a somewhat philosophical campaign. Some of my things I discuss are tangential. I do get a lot of inspiration from literature and the arts. I'm actually an arts professional. I have not worked in journalism since the 80s, but social media and blogging has given me the opportunity to do more writing, and I've spoken at a few council meetings, and thanks for your vote.
Thank you. Mr. Schmid?
Thank you all for coming and allowing me to run. At the beginning, I talked about what I said were 2 substantive strategic issues. I want to close with one process strategic issue for me. I was reading an economic journal the other night and had a review article about a new field in economics called Groups Make Better Decisions Than Individuals. It had the recent studies over the last decade where the economics field has done all kinds of experiments and studies. And they found that when you're dealing with a question of efficiency, sophistication, or complexity, that groups make better decisions, better outcomes in their decisions than individuals. One study said that 97% of diverse groups make better decisions than the smartest member of the group. Now that rang a bell with me. De Tocqueville said that 200 years ago. He said, people participating in government make better decisions, and that's especially true at the local level where individuals have a chance to participate. So my process principle is public participation produces better decisions. Whether you're looking at openness and transparency, whether you're looking at discussions of public benefits, or you're looking at investment in process, taking a little extra time to do it, public participation produces better results.
Thank you. Mr. Berman?
Once again, thank you to the League of Women Voters for organizing today's forum, and thank you to all of you for the great questions and for caring enough about Palo Alto to come out and spend 2 hours with us on a beautiful Saturday afternoon. These forums are meant to provide an opportunity for you to learn about us, and I hope you have, but they also give us a chance to learn from you and to learn about what's on the community's mind and what we should be focusing on. So thank you for that. I've got a lot of notes and I've got a lot of research to do. I'm the least known candidate up here. Everyone else has been on the ballot before, most of them more than once. And I hope I've been able to provide some answers and details to some of your questions. More importantly, I hope that I've given you some insight into how I analyze situations and how I reach conclusions. I'm running for City Council because I'm passionate about Palo Alto and because I believe that the City Council plays a vital role in the strength of our town and in the quality of life of Palo Altans. The Council will be making decisions in the next 4 years that will have an enormous impact on the city for decades. I grew up here. I chose to move back here. And I want to make sure that we make the right decisions so that Palo Alto is a place where my generation can raise our families with the same tremendous experiences and opportunities that I had growing up. Palo Alto didn't become a world-class town by accident, and it won't remain one through inertia. It takes the hard work of both elected and unelected leaders and the watchful eye of a passionate and engaged public. This is why I'm asking for your vote in this election. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Kniss?
Thanks, and thanks to all of you for coming this afternoon. And thanks to anyone who may be watching in the future, and I hope that there are those who do. It has been said that a man or a woman is known by the company they keep. So one of the things that I wanted to read to you is a quote from one of the men I have served with many times in many different areas. And what Joe Simidian wrote about me was that I have deep roots in the town. I know every corner, every issue, and I'm willing to listen and make decisions for the good of the whole community. I hope that is the case. A little about me. Many of you know me for a very long time. I've been a member of the League for a very long time. I lived in Palo Alto, raised my children here. I've also lived in the Midtown area. I've lived in the Green Meadow area, and now I live in the old Palo Alto area. I think there is hardly a street that I don't know by now. It has been a wonderful community to live in, but an even more wonderful community to serve in. I've been very lucky. Many of you know I served on the school board and I've served on the council previously. I've been lucky enough to be mayor twice. I was the only woman who was mayor twice, and I think it's very important for us to talk about women and the role that they play on the city council. I'm looking up and down. I think I'm the only woman running. And I think it's important to have women represented. You have 3 now of the 9. I would like to add to that number so that there are 4 of the 9. I think we bring a different perspective, and I think we bring a different set of ways that we operate to something like the council. So I want to thank you once again for being here this afternoon on a hot afternoon, for your very thoughtful questions. They were excellent, particularly the ones that dealt with thorny issues like planned communities, pensions, and what are we going to do about our long-term commitments. So thanks for coming. We look forward to the next forum on October 11th.
Thank you, Mr. Burt.
Well, some of my fellow candidates have already spoken about the value of public participation. And in Palo Alto, we are blessed with a great commitment of the community to what we do and what we share. In a lot of quarters and over the years, I've heard it derided as part of the Palo Alto process. And I was never one to buy into that was predominantly something that was a detriment. I certainly have believed that we can operate more efficiently and effectively as governing bodies. That's not a replacement for a highly engaged citizenry that adds to the value of our community and adds to our decision-making as we go forward on all the series of issues that we encounter each and every year. I believe that citizen participation challenges us as leaders and participates in a meaningful way in the actual ideas and the implementation of what we do. And without this very engaged citizenry, we wouldn't be the community that we are. Many of what makes our community exceptional, many of the things, are those extra layers that are provided by the community, both in terms of the services we provide and what they provide on decision making. At the same time, the city council members are your elected representatives, and we have to make many difficult decisions after weighing input from the community as a whole and our own best judgment and experience. When I first ran, I was only able to make one real promise. I mean, a lot of commitments, but one promise, which is that I can guarantee almost every one of our voters that within a year, I'll take you off with some vote I take. And what I have to do is hope that in the end, you'll look at the body of our work as elected representatives and judge us on that. And I have the faith that as a sophisticated electorate, that's what Palo Altans do. So I look for your support so that I can continue my work for the next 4 years on these issues.
Thank you, Mr. Burt. Mr. Gray.
It is a privilege to get to participate in this discussion, and thank you for the members of this table for your contributions. I'm better with numbers than words. I am a CPA, and so I just want to say that I'm ready to do the work. I'd be one of 9 rudders that no one council member would be the determining direction. But if you really care about financial discipline and making room for infrastructure and an infrastructure first agenda, if you really care about wanting to put a cap on the abuses of the planned community zoning and lend a watchful eye towards that, no one person on the council is going to create that direction, but that will be the advocacy that I would offer. And I think that there's room for a numbers person on the council and actually a need, and I would really like to be that cooperator who could cooperate with Pat, Liz, Greg, Marc, or Marc. We know how to get things done, and I'd like to have that privilege of your vote.
Thank you very much. And I want to thank all the candidates for being here, and also thank all of you, our audience. I also want to especially acknowledge and thank the many volunteers who've worked to make this forum a success. And this is an important piece of democracy. You're taking the time to learn more about the candidates who would like to be your leaders, and it's an important process. It's one that is critical to not only the future of Palo Alto, but really for the regional Bay Area as well. And as someone from San Jose, I will be working with our San Jose representatives. I'm sure that Palo Altans will make some very good decisions. I'd like to now pass the mic back to the League Vice President, Bonnie. Thank you very much.
On behalf of the League of Women Voters of Palo Alto and all of us here, we want to present you with this, I think it's a oregano. Thank you for coming out here from San Jose. We'd like to have a moderator who is not involved in Palo Alto politics. It could be a completely unbiased moderator, and I think Larry did a great job, so thank you. I don't go away. I have some things to finish up with and to tell you about. I forgot to mention 3 other co-sponsors of this forum is the Palo Alto Council PTAs, Avenidas, and Project Safety Net. So that was in addition to the ones I mentioned earlier. So thank you to those co-sponsors. And I have a list of lots of people to thank. Special thanks to Trina Lovercheck and Suzanne Bailey. They are our voter service forum ladies who have been putting together this forum and a whole list of other forums, which I'm going to tell you about in a minute. So they've been doing a yeoman's job. It's really difficult trying to get everybody's schedule, the venues, and getting everything coordinated. So let's give them a hand. And to Relly Davison and Veronica Tincher for keeping everybody on time, and to the candidates for staying on time. To our question sorters over there, Karen Sunbeck, who is here from our league and also from Green Meadow Association. Evan, is that right? Evan Laurie, who's from Midtown, and Nancy Olson, who's from our league. Did a great job with the questions. And to the people who were greeting you and collecting your questions, Carolyn Dobrovich, see her? Yeah? No? Oh, she wasn't here. Okay, so Penny Elson was collecting them, and Rockblatt? Is that here? No? Oh, okay. Rosalie Lefkowitz was here. And who else was collecting questions? And Suzanne, Bailey, and Trina were collecting questions, so thank you. I want to tell you now about smartvoter.org. It's everything you ever wanted to know about the election. This is a website created by the League, and it's really great to work with. And October 1st, there's going to be a new generation of this Smart Voter being debuted, so that'll be happening then. Next week, is September 25th already? Or the week after? Anyway, that's National Voter Registration Day. So if you haven't registered to vote yet, or you know people, or if you've moved or whatever, don't forget, we have some of these forms on the back. The last day to register to vote for the November 6th election is October 22nd. That's the day it has to be postmarked. So keep that in mind. We also have on the back table Facts for Voters that has, the side table, Facts for Voters, which is a brochure that we put out that lists everything, all the contact information of all the boards and commissions and the elected people and whatever. It'll change for 2013, but this is current until the end of the year. We also have this other brochure that's very useful for, it's a guide to voting. If you have new voters in your family or new neighbors on your block, it might be a good thing to share with them. The other thing I want to tell you are the forums that are coming up. We do forums on the pros and cons of the ballot measures, and there are a number of those coming up. On the 25th, Tuesday morning, the Palo Alto Chamber of Commerce is hosting one. It's open to the public. That's at 7:30 a.m. and they're doing it at the Westin. There's one on October 3rd at Avenidas. That one at 2 p.m. is going to focus on Propositions 30 and 38. Those are the propositions that deal with funding for education. And they're going to have a presentation on the school funding in general in California, and then talk about how those propositions deal with that. And then 2 more forums on all the propositions, one on October 8th at Avenidas at 2 p.m., another one at Channing House on Wednesday, October 10th at 7 p.m. You're not all taking this down. This will be up on our website, and it'll be in the voter, which will be in the libraries hopefully by next weekend. Candidates forums, Thursday, October 11th for the City Council. It's going to be from 8 to 9:30 because I think there's either presidential or vice presidential debate that's going to be televised earlier in the evening. So we're pushing back the time of the candidates forum till 8, and that'll be at the City Council chambers. For the Palo Alto Unified School District Board candidates, Wednesday, October 3rd at the 25 Churchill, and that also, the time will start at 8 o'clock, also being pushed back for the presidential debate that's being televised earlier. There are also a couple of forums for state assembly and state senate candidates that we're doing with the league in South San Mateo County. That's going to be Wednesday, October 17th, Menlo Park City Council chambers. And then there's some other forums that I'm sure you're not absorbing this also. I'm not going to go through the list for the Foothill De Anza Board of Trustees and the Santa Clara County Board of Ed. So if you want to know, just come up to me. I have this list. This wasn't finalized yet because we're still trying to pin down the exact times of the forums. And our voter is on the league website. That's LWVPaloAlto.org. So just Google League Palo Alto and you'll find our website. So I think I've covered it all. Oh, one other thing, when you vote by mail, be sure to sign the envelope. Don't forget. We were told by the registrar of voters to remind everybody. And those ballots, I understand, will be mailed out October 9th. So you'll be getting your vote by mail ballots next month. So thank you all for coming, and I think I've covered everything. And if there's anything else you want to know, we'll be outside. You can be outside to talk to the candidates outside on the patio. Thank you very much.